Hello, Chuck Lieber here again with Lieber's Home Team, representing Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate All Seasons, and thanks for tuning into my video blog. The title of today's episode is Can't Close? Now What? Imagine, if you can, having packed all your belongings in the moving van, sending the moving van on its way in anticipation of closing on the sale of your home, only to find out that the transaction has fallen apart. You won't be closing. What a nightmare. Most transactions do close, and in fact none of my clients have had this problem, but it does happen. Hiring an experienced agent is your first defense against this unpleasant scenario, but knowing how this can happen can help to prevent it from happening. Probably the most common reason for failure to close is that the buyer cannot qualify for the financing. Avoiding this travesty is easy, and here's how. Being cautious early in the process is important. You might be excited about a higher than expected offer, but you need to ensure that the buyer is qualified before you accept the offer. Accompanying the offer should be some kind of proof that the buyer qualifies for financing. There are two kinds of proof. The first and least impressive is a pre-qualification letter. This is a letter from a lender stating that based on the information that the buyer has supplied to the lender, the buyer is qualified for the loan applied for. Typically, prior to approval, the lender needs to verify credit, employment history, verify that the buyer has funds for the down payment and closing costs, and verify income history. A better letter is a pre-approval letter. This is a letter that is written after all the verifications have been accomplished. This letter, however, normally states that the approval is, in quotes, subject to no derogatory changes to income or employment. Final commitment will be given upon satisfactory review of the purchase agreement, appraisal, and title, end quotes. Occasionally, buyers will go out between approval and closing and use their credit cards to purchase large items. Then, when the lender does a final check of their qualifications just prior to closing, that new credit load could prompt the lender to disapprove the buyer. The source of the letter is also important. If the letter is from a reputable lender, it may be reliable, but if it's from a lesser-known lender, verification may be necessary. When I'm representing a seller and we receive a viable offer, I call the lender to see how far in the process the lender is, and to see if the lender cautioned the buyer not to make any large purchases. Getting the appraisal done early is also important, especially in this market. Appraisers are under great scrutiny and are very cautious about overvaluing a property, so get it done early. In Minnesota, the financing addendum, which is part of the purchase agreement paperwork, has an option that requires the buyer to provide documentation from the lender that the buyer is approved for the loan by a specific date, which should be well before the closing date. Once that letter is received, if the buyer is not able to get financing, the buyer forfeits the earnest money to the seller. Under these circumstances, it then becomes important to have specified a reasonably large earnest money amount. Title work is less of an issue, but it can delay closing. Try to get the title commitment at least a week before closing. I've heard of situations where the title work was not finished until a day before closing, only to discover that there were problems which delayed closing. So in conclusion, the best way to avoid delays is to work with an experienced agent. Again, I'm Chuck Lieber with Lieber's Home Team, representing Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate All Seasons. Thanks for taking the time to view this episode of my video blog, and tune in next time.